Hello, my name is Carolina, and today for my presentation I have chosen to report on the allegations against Mr. Tufnell from the Parole Board of Canada. The subject of today's presentation is Mr. Frederick Tufnell, who, prior to these allegations, was the RVC, the Regional Vice Chairperson of the Ontario-Nunavut region of the Parole Board of Canada. Someone in his position would be responsible to the chairperson for the professional conduct, training, and quality of decision-making of board members. This instance, spoken about today, is the first time in Canadian history where allegations of this sort were obtained during the course of another investigation, not from a whistleblower situation. Review of incident. Allegation number 1. Mr. Tufnell knowingly placed himself in a conflict of interest situation by involving himself further in a file that he initially deemed himself unable to vote on for reason of bias. Mr. Tufnell requested a second review of the file and forced a new decision which inevitably favored him. Although he did not directly vote on the file, his actions in leading another review led to bias, and his bias playing out. Review of the incident. Allegation number 2. Mr. Tufnell faced further allegations. These were regarding his conduct with others. He demonstrated inappropriate behavior toward female employees in the workplace over extended amounts of time. Mr. Tufnell criticized other board members to outside parties and made unauthorized disclosures of information to people who were not privy to them. The investigation. On June 26, 2013, Mr. Joe Friday, the Deputy Commissioner, initiated an investigation to determine whether the allegations against Mr. Tufnell had grounds. It was deemed that Mr. Tufnell was in breach of Section 155(2) of the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, the CCRA, where a member of the board may not participate in a review of a case in circumstances where a reasonable apprehension of bias may result from the participation of that member. In addition, Mr. Tufnell was also in serious breach of the Parole Board's Code of Professional Conduct through the investigation into allegation number 2. Investigation and resource. The investigation found that there was a pattern when it came to Mr. Tufnell's behavior toward female employees. This behavior included, but was not limited to, giving female employees massages, putting his hands on the knees of female staff when speaking to them, and touching their backs, arms, and neck and hair. He also made flirty and offensive jokes. He was also part of allegedly receiving a foot rub from a female employee at the Parole Board forum. Witnesses stated that they were either too intimidated by Mr. Tufnell to speak up, or feared their careers might be in jeopardy if they do. Mr. Tufnell argued that the intentions behind his actions were innocent, and that he meant nothing by them. However, someone in Mr. Tufnell's position ought to have known that his behavior was inappropriate. As we recall, as the RVC, Mr. Tufnell was in charge of professional conduct, training, and quality of decision-making. The investigators also argued that Mr. Tufnell's behavior toward his female employees extended over long periods of time, and that his actions were beyond simple mistakes or isolated incidents. The Office of the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner of Canada case report from January 2014 and the news articles from the Toronto Star and the CBC were used as resources for this presentation. Ethical issues. It goes without saying that the behavior Mr. Tufnell exhibited, especially by someone in his position, was highly unethical. He had a responsibility to the staff under him and to the public to hold himself in this position to a high moral and ethical standard. As Section 155, Section 2 of the CCRA stated in the previous slide, Mr. Tufnell was in violation of the standard which all board members are meant to hold themselves to in order to avoid bias. Secondly, Mr. Tufnell's behavior with female staff is far outside of the regular conduct a vice chairperson is meant to have with his staff, and in my opinion goes beyond any workplace relationship. Access to privileged information is not something that criminal justice professionals should take lightly. There are facts to certain cases or files that are only to be known by those authorized to know. Mr. Tufnell knowingly choosing to share privileged information with unauthorized members goes beyond any criminal justice agency's policy. Although Mr. Tufnell remains a member of the parole board, his designation as the RVC, the regional vice chairperson, was terminated on September 24, 2013, following this investigation. After this investigation, Mr. Tufnell's ability to hold a position of trust within the public service was reassessed due to his poor decision-making on this matter. Departmental changes took place after Mr. Tufnell's investigation. All new board members must now undergo training encompassing professional standards and ethical behavior, and those who hold positions that require public trust and confidence receive a copy of standards that outline professionalism, accountability, transparency, and respect of the law. Some of the ethical theories that come into play here with the allegations against Mr. Tufnell are egoism and social contract theory. Egoism. Under this ethical theory, the reason that someone would choose any action is to bring happiness or some other benefit to him or herself. It is self-serving. It provides gratification for the individual in some way or another. In the case of Mr. Tufnell, regarding allegation number 1, he knew that involving himself in this case would lead to a biased outcome, and he did it anyway. He knew that his choice to involve himself was a self-serving one, and one that would lead to the outcome he wanted. In the end, his decision was one that brought him gratification, thus falling in line with the theory of egoism. Social contract theory. Mr. Tufnell breached the social contract by engaging with female subordinates in a sexual manner. His actions not only breached the professional conduct rules set out by the parole board, but more importantly breached the social contract within society. To conclude, Mr. Tufnell's actions as the regional vice chairperson of the Ontario-Nunavut region of the Parole Board of Canada were in serious breach of the moral and ethical standards that someone with that authority should hold. He should have faced greater consequence for these actions and should no longer hold a seat on the Parole Board of Canada. Mr. Tufnell used his position to call for a second review on a file that he deemed himself unable to vote on due to bias. His behavior with female staff was unethical and made them feel unsafe in the workplace.